I'm Zoltan Pepper, our first segment in Game Time with Chin Man.
Hello, can you hear me?
Chin Man, are you with us?
Hi Zoltan, yes, I am here. Someone told me we are playing a game this morning, is that right?
Yes, I thought it'd be fun to play Watch a Mouth with a man, or part of a man. Let's get on with the game, Chin Man. You'll need to put the mouth stretching device that you've been provided.
You mean this?
Yes, now I'm going to give you a word or phrase for you to say to the families that are watching. Do you understand, Chin Man?
Yeah, sure, but I have a question.
Great, then let's get started. Chin Man, you can say your phrase below.
Okay. Lancy trampoline. Lancy trampoline.
If you think you know what he's saying, type in the comments below.
Lancy trampoline.
Chin Man, you can say your phrase below.
Children's ride ponies for pleasure. Yeah, you got that? Children's ride ponies for pleasure.
If you think you know what he's saying, type in the comments now.
Ponies for pleasure. Yeah. Ponies for pleasure. Children's ride ponies for pleasure.
Chin Man, you can say your phrase below.
Okay, the last one. I need a window washing visor.
If you think you know what he's saying, remember, put it in the comments below.
I need a window washing visor. Yeah.
Thanks, Chin Man, for playing.
Well, now that you're all caught up on the breaking news, let's get to today's story. Today's true Bible story comes from the book of Nehemiah in chapters 1 through 6 and shows us that God fights for his people. Y'all check this video out.
God's people had lived in Babylon for 70 years. Then King Cyrus, the king of Persia, took over Babylon and let them go home. Some of God's people went to Judah, but some of them stayed. Nehemiah stayed and worked for the king of Persia. One day, some men came from Judah. Nehemiah asked, "How are God's people doing in Jerusalem?" The men had bad news. The people are in trouble. The walls around Jerusalem are broken down and the gates have been burned down. Nehemiah cried. Then he prayed and fasted. The king noticed Nehemiah and asked, "What's wrong? Why are you sad?" Nehemiah was afraid. No one was supposed to be sad around the king. Nehemiah said, "The city where my ancestors are from is in ruins, and the gates of the city have been burned down." The king sent Nehemiah to Jerusalem. Nehemiah inspected the walls and led the people to start rebuilding the walls and gates. The workers put in doors, bolts, and bars. They cut stones and lifted them into place on the wall, and they filled in gaps and holes. All around the city, people worked side by side. Soon, the wall was half as tall as it had once been. Not everyone was happy that Jerusalem's walls were being rebuilt. Some men who lived nearby were angry. God's people kept working on the walls, but their enemies made a plan to attack them and stop their work. God's people prayed and chose men to guard the walls all day and all night. But the people were discouraged. "Our enemies are everywhere," they said. Nehemiah reminded the people that God was with them. "Don't be afraid. God is great and powerful," Nehemiah said. "Be ready. If our enemies attack us, God will fight for us." Enemies could threaten God's people, but they could not make God's people stop building. Their enemies were not in charge of rebuilding the wall. God was. So God's people went back to work. Some stood guard with weapons, and others worked on the wall. Some men worked with one hand and held a weapon in the other. They were always ready to fight, just in case. Nehemiah was a wise and good leader for God's people while they worked. In just 52 days, the wall was complete. The gates were repaired and the wall was restored. When all of Jerusalem's enemies heard that the wall had been rebuilt, they were afraid because they knew God was with his people. Nehemiah led the people to rebuild the walls around Jerusalem to protect them from their enemies. Jesus came to protect us from our greatest enemy, sin and death. He died on the cross and rose from the dead to rescue everyone who trusts in him.
This true story shows us many things about God and his love for us. One thing that stands out the clearest to me is that he provides for us and protects us when we trust in him. Just as Nehemiah knew that even in the presence of his enemies, the Lord would provide and protect, we can and should have the same trust and faith. If you feel the attacks of Satan, remember Ephesians 6:10 and 11. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. If you feel overwhelmed and or defeated, remember Psalms 23 verse 4. It says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. If you know about Jesus, but know that you don't have a personal relationship with him, Romans 10:9 says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. There is freedom in Christ, and that is worth the time to consider and pray about for both parents and kids. Let's watch this last video, Questions from Kids.
Hey there, I'm Pastor Brian, and it's time for Questions from Kids. Oliver from Johnson City, Tennessee asks,
Does God protect us today?
Oliver, yes, he does. God protects us, but we're going to have to unpack what it means that he protects us in a second. We see in today's Bible story, the story of Nehemiah, how God led his people back to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the city walls in an amazingly quick period of time, by the way. Why this was significant was this. First of all, it's God making good on his promise to get his people back into the land, but also the city walls were for protection. This was the way that God's people would be safe from enemies, and also it was a way to show the people around Israel that God was with his people. He was not leaving them vulnerable and exposed. And so that's what the city walls represented, protection from harm. So God protected his people then, he protects us today. Now, what does that mean? That does not mean that nothing bad will happen, that nothing difficult will happen, that you will never get hurt. Sometimes God even brings pain into our lives. He brings hurt into our lives because it's the greatest good for us. Discipline hurts, but God is a loving Father who disciplines us so that we can follow him better, we can obey him better. It's actually for our good that we're disciplined. So there's just one case where if we think of protection as being, never experiencing pain, never experiencing difficulty, no, that's not the case. Think of Jesus. Jesus suffered, didn't he? He died. That was all part of God's good plan. So why do we think that God will shield us from all pain when he didn't even shield his son from all pain? But here's what protection means. It means ultimately God protects us from the ultimate consequences of our sin, separation from him, and spiritual death. And it also means that at times he will protect us on earth from things that are painful, that he'll protect us at times from things that would bring us harm. But we just can't count on that being every single time. So here's a question back for you to think about. Can you think of a time when God protected you in the past?
Pause the video and take all the time you need to talk about these questions as a family. Parents, keep leading well. families, be the church that He's called us to be in all seasons? I'm attaching the questions below, and we'll see you next time.